Hey everyone, I'm Blue Bob's the Gaming CPA, and today I figured that since we have now learned of Google's Q3 2020 financials are released, I decided, hey, why don't we go ahead and go through it and see what we can decipher as far as Google's financial health, especially during this COVID-19 time. One thing I wanted to compare is, obviously I can't talk Stadia specific because on their consolidated financial statements, Stadia is not listed separately, but I will bring up the part where Stadia is probably included in what line item that is, and we can discuss it a little bit further. Also, a little bit about Google Cloud revenue significantly increasing and seeing just how that just might end up pertaining a little bit to Stadia, as well as just kind of the future of things going to the cloud. So, first thing I wanted to bring up is Google's quarterly revenue, and this is ending September 30th, 2020, so that means it's going to be July 1st to September 30th. Their quarterly revenue was $46 billion, all right, $46,173 million. This is up 14% from prior year, so from September 30th of 2019, all right, they increased that by 14%, so this is $46,173,000,000 in 3 months. All right, so that is their just overall revenue. Okay, that doesn't include any sort of costs, any sort of expenses. That's just their revenue. Now, I wish I could make $46,000 in one quarter, but I don't. Let alone 46 billion. Their net income. So this is after they take out all their expenses, depreciation expense, all of their payroll expenses, renting of their facilities, stuff like that. Their net income for the quarter ends up being $11.247 billion. All right, so $11,247,000,000. This is up about $4 billion from prior year. So from 2019 only saw around $7 billion in the third quarter. They increased it by $4 billion, so that's $11.247 billion. Now imagine you going into your boss and getting a raise, and if you get an extra $4 an hour, like, you'd probably be over the moon. You'd probably be super happy, like, hey, I just got this big raise. Imagine getting $4 billion more in just one quarter. Mind blown. So Google other income, so Google has to separate out line items, and if there's something specific that, if I recall, it generates about 10%, it's either 5 or 10% of the overall company's total, it has to be listed separately, and if there's an increase in revenue that I believe exceeds 10% or 20%, then they have to include it on a line item as well. So you'll see YouTube on there. YouTube is a separate line item. Google Cloud is now a separate line item. And then everything else besides like Google Search is going to be jammed into what's called Google Other. And that's like all their subsidiaries, all their little businesses that are generating revenue or generating losses, and they all just get lump sum because they're not material enough to affect and impact the financials so that an investor needs to know about them. So that's why they're under the Google Other. And that's where I believe Stadia is located. So Stadia is going to be located in that Google Other column, along with probably Waymo, along with probably a bunch of like their Nest sales and all of their Google products as well. So that's just a heads up. But that Google Other account did see an increase of about $1.4 billion. And its total for the quarter was $5,478,000,000. All right, so they sold $5,478,000,000 worth of product or services among all these other little subsidiaries and all these other products. But it increasing from 2019 to 2020 by 1.4 billion is actually significant. Remember, guys, this is all in just one quarter. So if you multiply it out by 4, roughly, like that's 20 some odd billion dollars for a year of 2020, especially during COVID. Like, that is a pretty good deal. Google Cloud, so this is what I wanted to point to. Okay, so Google Cloud, this is where I believe that obviously companies can kind of store their data in the servers in the cloud and then access it remotely, immediately, just kind of like with the Stadia devs that we've seen, where they're able to immediately run their Play instances because it's all based in the cloud, stuff like that. Google Cloud has seen an increase from $2,379,000,000 to $3,444,000,000. All right, that is a big jump. Okay, that is a huge jump. It's only $1.1 billion, but the fact that it was only 2.3 and then it jumps up by 1.1 billion, like almost 50% more, that is what is crucial and that is what is key. I think that is something that COVID has kind of brought, that Google has been able to capitalize on. People working from home more, businesses working from home more, trying to store their stuff remote so that anyone can access it and have easier access. I know I remote in for my work, and we know our servers are on site per se, but I do know we do utilize some outside sources like Salesforce. So we dump a bunch of data into Salesforce, and we use that to run reports quicker and just have better visuals. So I think that Google is definitely capitalizing on what COVID has brought us and what businesses are trying to basically change and evolve their structure so that it's easier for our employees. Next thing we're going to touch into, so that's kind of the revenue portion, that's kind of the net income. Again, net income meaning that's income after all expenses. So it's like, hey, I took $100, I made $100, I spent out $80, I made $20, that's going into my pocket. Boom, Google has $11.247 billion going into their pocket. So that's great. So their balance sheet, cash and cash equivalents. So this is cash that they have on hand, all right, and cash equivalents could literally be like, okay, so you got cash, obviously that's a big one, and then let's just say like, I mean, it's probably just cash. I was just thinking like gift cards and items like that, but like I don't think Google, I mean, they could have gift cards on hand, a bunch of Google Play gift cards or something. That is $20 billion, so $20,129,000,000 of cash and cash equivalents. Now the total cash and cash equivalents and marketable securities, which is basically investments they have, basically items that can be liquidated quickly and turned into cash, is $132,596,000,000. Google has basically not exactly just in a bank, but they can turn it liquid and be ready to basically need it if they want to buy, if they want to, hey, Capcom, $10 million, here you go. This is where they're going to pull that money from. And that is $132,596,000,000. So a mind-blowing amount of cash on hand. Now the best part is the fact that they can cover their liabilities, and we're going to cover that in just a second. Their total current assets. Total current assets is going to be that total cash and marketable securities is going to include accounts receivable, which is sales they have made but have not received cash for. It's going to include inventory and other things like that. Their total current assets, basically assets they can expect to receive either money on, or it's basically going to be an investment or something that they can physically hold on to within 1 year. Current means within a year, is $164,369,000,000. So an additional $32 billion is in their accounts receivable, it's in their inventory, which they expect to be able to sell and receive cash within a year, and stuff like that. So $164 billion. Their total assets, so this is now including all the current assets and their non-current, aka their massive server farms, massive buildings they own, all right, property, plant, and equipment, okay? All of that stuff combined equals $299,243,000,000. So Google basically has assets around $300 billion, okay? Liabilities. Now this is important. This is super crucial because I could have $3 billion of assets, but if I have $300 billion of assets, but I have $300 billion of debt against it, then my net actual profitability or my net actual worth is $0. So the liabilities is important because you're going to see companies, and I'm going to compare Google to a company here in a second, that has a very similar cash and assets value, but their liabilities is very different. All right, so Google's total current liabilities. So like I said above, current assets. All right, current assets within 1 year you're expected to receive it. Liabilities is within 1 year expected to pay it. So let's say I receive an invoice on December 30th and I'm supposed to pay my electric bill. All right, I receive the invoice, I'm supposed to pay it. I have used the electricity. If I don't pay that until 2021, then I'm going to show an accounts payable to my electric company for $100. All right, it's a liability that I'm expected to pay within a year. That is what a current liability is. Their current liabilities are $48,200,000,000. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but again, if they have $132 billion of cash on hand, then it's really not too bad. All right, $48,200,000,000. Now their total liabilities, including liabilities which could be loans from companies, long-term liabilities is basically liabilities you expect to pay that is over a year long. So let's say I have a 5-year loan on a vehicle. That is a long-term liability. I'm expecting to pay that in 5 years, not 1. So that is why that's going to get classified to long-term liabilities. The total liabilities between current and long term is 86 billion 323 million. Okay. Now the great thing about Google is they have more cash than they have current liabilities, which is important. They have more current assets than they do current liabilities, the liquidity ratio, them being able to quickly liquidate their cash and remove all current debt. They have way more than that. They have 4 times that, basically, or sorry, they have 3 times that amount, just about. They also have more cash than they have debt. So they could, in essence, wipe out all their debt, be debt-free as a company, have cash on hand, have all their assets, and just be in a very healthy financial situation. So Google is in a very, very healthy situation regardless of the current COVID crisis. Now, like I said, I was going to compare the assets of Google to the assets of another company. And I'll give you a hint. This company sells a product that starts with an X. All right? That's your hint. Okay, that company has $177 billion of current assets. Again, that's the cash, marketable securities, accounts receivable, inventory, money they're expected to receive within 1 year. They have $177 billion, so they have $13 billion more than Google as of September 30th, 2020. But their total liabilities is $177 billion, whereas Google only has $86 billion. So their current assets covers their total liabilities by equal, perfect. Google is basically has double the amount of current assets over their liabilities, so Google can pay off all their debt and still have reasonably about $50 billion left over. So Google is in a very healthy spot. That's not to mention the fact that their stockholders' equity is a very tiny amount. So stockholders' equity is basically, you can buy Google stock. All right, I can buy Google stock. I don't know what the stock price is right now, but if I wanted to buy, let's say, 1,000 shares and it costs $5 a share, which is not at all what Google costs. Okay, this is just an example. Google's probably in the hundreds of dollars, but that would cost me $5,000. Google stockholders' equity would show, hey, we are now valued at $5,000 in the stockholders' equity column. So this is basically investments made by stockholders, people who own Google stock. And that is $57,307 million. All right, $57,307 million. Now, the huge awesome thing in this one is the retained earnings. Retained earnings is, like I mentioned earlier, Google's net income of $11,247 million that goes back into Google's pocket. Retained earnings is money that's basically been reinvested back in. Okay, companies like this, they can pay out dividends, they can release some of their funds back into the stockholders, but a lot of people want to see a company reinvest in itself to grow itself, all right, to become even more profitable and to basically allow that stock price to surge up and up and up. Google's retained earnings is $155,567 million. Okay, it's a lot of money. Like, basically how much cash they have is how much retained earnings. It's basically the exact same amount, just about. Now, again, comparing to that other company I mentioned that happens to sell a product that starts with an X, all right, that is also in a gaming platform, they only have $39 billion of retained earnings, meaning they've only technically been able to be $39 billion of profitableness over their lifespan. All right, that's all the money they've been able to basically reinvest and keep inside the company. All right, so Google is about 4 times that amount reinvested in itself. Google can pay itself all of its debts off. And again, we've seen that Google being a billion-dollar company, possibly even, if you think about all the possibilities, it wouldn't be far-fetched to even maybe call it a trillion-dollar company because of basically its potential and its return on investment. We are going to see, hopefully, out of that $11.2 billion net income all of Google has received, if we can start seeing portions of that going out to Stadia, and like we saw with Capcom, $10 million to Capcom, if we can see more things like that to big developers and big publishers to get the games ported over, it's not really going to hurt Google overall in the long run. Like, guys, Stadia has a very large bank account to draw from. Okay, a very, very large bank account, huge. Okay, and again, for me, I don't think that Stadia is necessarily costing Google a lot. Like Stadia itself, I guarantee you their biggest cost is going to be to publishers and developers, payroll. I don't even think necessarily building their controllers and CCUs, because they already have the CCU. Controller is technically the one thing they've had to make that was not just a Google product already, but they're already using the servers that Google has. So it's not like Stadia went and built their own servers. They might start upgrading them sooner, like they might start forcing Google to upgrade them sooner, but Google can utilize whatever hardware increases Stadia needs to make to try to keep up. It's not like Stadia had to go build its own server farm or its own data farm, and that's why I think people, I'm like, why would they kill it? Why would they kill Stadia? Because it is not an extra super expensive subsidiary per se. I mean, besides having to hire more customer support, which is great during COVID because people need jobs, besides they need to hire more customer support and maybe some like reps to go out and like communicate with these devs, like they're not having to spend buku amount on capital to get this thing up and running. Besides the fact that they did start their development company, the SG&E, which is going to be awesome because that will probably see the biggest return on investment, because instead of just getting a 30% cut on sale, you're getting a 100% cut when you're selling it to the Stadia store. If they end up, and sadly, I mean, they might be able to sell it to Amazon Luna and port it over to there, but no native console game is going to be able to run a true native cloud developed game from Stadia Games and Entertainment. So hey guys, I just want to let you know Q3 2020 is looking good. Google's looking great right now, financially speaking. So fingers crossed that Stadia is going to be able to see a little bit of those funds possibly show up and arrive. Fingers crossed that we will continue to see the platform get developed, whether that means that money needs to go out to developers and publishers like it did with Capcom or not. But I just want to let you guys know Stadia is going to be just fine. Google, the parent company, Alphabet, they're doing awesome. They're doing amazing. They're continuing to increase revenue, continue to increase net income. And as far as financially speaking, their liabilities are covered by their assets. They are not being controlled by stockholders' equity. They're able to kind of continue on their trend internally, which is great to see as well. So that's all we have it for today. I'm Blue Bob's the Gaming CPA. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. And as always, until next time, maximize those deductions and pay less in taxes. Have a great one.